The first time I realised my family could move without me, it wasn't in a courtroom. It was in my parents' dining room, under that warm chandelier they kept dimmed like a museum exhibit. I'd come in through the garage like I always did, shoes off, keys in the bowl. The house smelled like lemon polish and something reheated. On the table, there was a stack of papers laid out in perfect squares. Not mail, not invitations, the kind of documents that come with tabs and signature lines. My mother's hand slid across them, slow and casual, like she was smoothing a wrinkle in a tablecloth. My father didn't look up from his phone. He just said, "We're handling it." Handling what? That was my question. My mother gave me that practiced smile she used at charity events. The smile that said, "Don't make this messy." "These are just updates," she said. "Routine." Routine doesn't come with a pen already uncapped. Routine doesn't happen in a room where everyone knows the plan except you. I didn't argue. I just stood there and felt the space where my name should have been. My name is Tessa Hart, and the thing they were trying to move around, it wasn't theirs to move. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from. If you've ever kept the peace just to stay in the family, stay with me. I grew up in a house that always looked calm from the street. White brick, black shutters, a brass mailbox with our last name engraved in a script that suggested history, even if most of it had been renovated. Inside, everything had a place. The throw pillows were aligned. The dining chairs were squared to the table. The air always smelled faintly of furniture polish and coffee that had gone slightly cold. We weren't old money, not technically. We were adjacent to it. My grandfather, Walter Langford, built his real estate portfolio one office building at a time. Midtown leases, a few solid commercial properties, nothing flashy. Just steady, careful growth over 40 years. My parents liked to stand near that success and let it warm them. My father, Graham Hart, became CFO of Walter's company before I turned 12. He spoke in words like liquidity and fiduciary responsibility at the dinner table the way other families talked about weather. My mother, Celeste, chaired committees, hosted luncheons, managed perception. In our house, the image was of oxygen. I learned early that my role was to cooperate with it. Brandon, my younger brother, didn't have to. Christmas morning, when I was 9, I remember the living room glowing under the tree lights, wrapping paper already half torn. My mother is filming with one hand. Brandon tore into a brand new dirt bike. He screamed. My father laughed. "That's my boy." My box was smaller, a leather-bound planner. "Because you're responsible," my mother said, kissing my forehead. Responsible wasn't the same thing as celebrated. I didn't know that yet, not fully, but I felt it. Years later, at 16, I stood in the driveway holding a shovel after a snowstorm. Brandon had gone inside to warm up. He never came back out. My father stepped onto the porch, coat open, tie loosened. "You're the dependable one," he told me. "Your brother, he's different. Different means forgiven. Dependable means expected." That was the day I learned love in my family had conditions. Years later, those conditions would have a price tag. By the time I graduated from college, I understood the hierarchy without anyone explaining it. Brandon had potential. I was insurance. At my graduation, the sun was brutal. Families lined up for photos on the lawn. My mother adjusted my hair before the camera clicked. "Smile," she whispered. I smiled. Then she pulled me aside, just out of frame. "Don't make this about you today," she said. "Your grandfather is here. Your father has clients watching. Keep it graceful." Keep it graceful. Even my accomplishments had to be quiet. Walter was the exception. Every Sunday I'd take the elevator up to his penthouse. The doorman would nod like I belonged there, even if I didn't feel that way anywhere else. His apartment smelled like coffee and old books. The city hummed through the windows. The chessboard was always set. He never rushed me, never corrected my posture, never told me to lower my voice. He just moved a piece and waited. "Integrity isn't loud," he once said, eyes on the board. "It's repetitive. It shows up in small choices." I didn't know at the time that he was watching ours. Thanksgiving 2016 is burned into my memory in quiet detail. The oven timer is buzzing. My mother carves turkey with theatrical precision. Brandon telling a story too loudly about a failed app he was convinced would disrupt something. After dessert, my father placed a thin stack of papers on the table. "Just updating beneficiary information," he said lightly. He slid one toward me. The pages were dense, corporate language, legal phrasing. "It's routine," he added. "Sign at the bottom." I skimmed. My name appeared in a section referencing a subsidiary I'd never heard of. "What is this entity?" I asked. My father's jaw tightened just slightly. "Don't overthink it, Tessa." My mother leaned in. "Family unity, sweetheart." Family unity always seemed to require my signature. "I'd like to review it first," I said. Silence. It wasn't explosive. It was colder than that. Brandon rolled his eyes. "You really think they're trying to screw you over?" I didn't answer. I didn't sign. For 3 months after that, my father barely spoke to me unless it was logistical. My mother told relatives I was going through a phase. I told myself it didn't matter. It always matters. One night, not long after that Thanksgiving, I came downstairs for water and heard my parents arguing in the study. Their voices were low but sharp. "He's getting suspicious," my mother said. "He won't act without proof," my father replied. "Then move it before he does." There was a pause. "And Brandon?" my mother asked. "We can't let him sink us." "Sink us?" I stood in the hallway, heart pounding, not fully understanding the words, but understanding the fear underneath them. They weren't arguing about emotions. They were arguing about exposure. I went back upstairs and told myself I'd misheard. I didn't understand it then, but they were already planning for a future they didn't intend to include me in. By 2019, the pattern had sharpened. My father invited me to dinner alone, steakhouse. Dark booths, corporate quiet. He handed me another packet of documents. "This is an investment structure," he said, "Cayman-based." "Efficient." Efficient was another word for invisible. I flipped through. The structure was layered, complex, intentionally so. "I'd like my own attorney to review this," I said carefully. His fork paused mid-air. "We don't need lawyers between us," he said. "We're family." I held his gaze. "So am I," I said. That was the last night he treated me like a daughter. After that, I was treated like a liability. Walter noticed the shift. One Sunday, after a quiet game, he looked at me longer than usual. "Has your father asked you to sign anything recently?" he asked. The question was soft. I hesitated. He nodded before I answered. "Small choices," he repeated, tapping a knight against the board. I didn't realize he had already started keeping score. By the time I turned 25, I understood something about my family that I didn't say out loud. We didn't fight in public. We negotiated in private. And if you didn't notice the negotiation, you were probably the currency. Brandon's different had evolved into a pattern. There was always a new idea, a new venture, a new emergency, a co-working space in Brooklyn that folded in 8 months, a boutique fitness studio that never opened, a crypto advisory firm that disappeared when the market dipped. Each time my father would sigh at the dinner table, "Entrepreneurship requires patience." Each time my mother would add, "Not everyone understands vision." What she meant was, I didn't understand it. When the bank calls came in, I was the one asked to review the numbers. When the accountant flagged irregular cash flow, I was the one told to take a look. But when praise was handed out, it was never my name. At a backyard barbecue one July, relatives filled the patio. My uncle stood near the grill holding a beer, talking about Brandon's risk tolerance. My aunt turned to me. "You're lucky your brother is so ambitious," she said. "Someone has to carry the family forward." I nodded. Somewhere in my chest, something tightened and stayed that way. A week later, I helped my grandfather sort through old property files in his study. The air conditioner hummed. Dust floated in the afternoon light. He moved slowly now, but his mind was still sharp. "Do you ever feel like you're watching something from outside the room?" he asked. I looked up. "What do you mean?" "Like decisions are being made around you," he said, "and you're expected to smile." I didn't answer. He didn't push. He just handed me a folder and let the silence sit. That silence said more than anything else. It wasn't long after that when I found out my name had been used. Not in a will, not yet, in corporate filings. I was at my desk one night, reviewing public records out of habit more than suspicion. A subsidiary appeared in the registry, an entity tied loosely to one of Walter's commercial holdings. Director, Tessa Hart. I stared at the screen. I had never agreed to serve on that board. I had never signed formation documents. But there it was, my name, typed cleanly into a system that would treat it as fact. I called my father the next morning. "It's administrative," he said before I finished my sentence. "Administrative doesn't require my consent." "You're overreacting." That word again. Brandon overheard part of the conversation later that evening. "You always assume the worst," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "You really think you deserve the same as me?" "For what?" The room went quiet. My mother's eyes flicked between us, calculating. I didn't answer him, because at that moment I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. It wasn't about deserving. It was about usefulness. If something went wrong, if money moved in ways it shouldn't, my name was now attached to it. I wasn't just insurance, I was insulation. That realization didn't explode. It settled, like snow. A few days later, I drove to my grandfather's building without calling ahead. Marla Benson opened the door. She'd worked for him longer than I'd been alive. She looked at me carefully. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine." She didn't believe me. I found Walter in his study, staring at the chessboard without moving a piece. "Something's wrong," he said before I spoke. I told him about the subsidiary. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he stood slowly, walked to the cabinet by his desk, and unlocked a drawer I had never seen open. He took out a small notebook. "I've been watching," he said quietly. "Watching what?" "Patterns." He didn't elaborate. He didn't accuse. He just closed the drawer again. That night, when I left, I noticed something else. The safe in the corner of his office, normally decorative, almost antique, was slightly ajar. It hadn't been before. At home, things shifted. My mother became more attentive, too attentive. "How's work?" she'd ask, eyes narrowing slightly when I answered. My father started referencing succession planning at dinner. "Stability matters," he said one night. "Not emotions, stability." Brandon laughed. "Yeah, Tess. Not everything is about your feelings." Feelings. They always reduced it to that. But I knew numbers, and numbers were telling a story. One evening, I walked into the garage looking for an extension cord and found a banker's box shoved behind paint cans. It wasn't labelled. Inside were copies of vendor invoices, consulting fees, development costs, payments routed through names I didn't recognise. The amounts weren't small. I stood there in the cold garage air, breath fogging slightly, and felt something shift in my spine. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't dramatic. I was late. They weren't worried I'd ruin the company. They were worried I'd see it. And once I saw it, I wouldn't pretend I hadn't. That was the real problem. I closed the box and slid it back where I found it. Upstairs, I could hear my parents laughing in the kitchen, glass clinking. The news was murmuring from the television. Normal. Ordinary. Controlled. I went to my room and lay awake staring at the ceiling fan. I thought about the planner I got for Christmas instead of the dirt bike, about the silent treatment after I refused Cayman documents, about my name typed into filings I never signed. I thought about what my grandfather said. Integrity shows up in small choices. So does betrayal. I didn't know how this would end. I just knew it wouldn't stay quiet forever. The day my grandfather died, it rained in that steady, polite Manhattan way that makes everything look more reflective than it is. The service was at a cathedral that smelled like old stone and lilies. People spoke in low, measured voices. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief that matched her coat. My father shook hands like he was closing deals. I stood near the back, listening to the echo of footsteps on marble and the faint hum of traffic outside. Grief has a sound. It's softer than you expect. At the reception afterward, I stepped into the coat room to grab my umbrella and heard my mother's voice through the half-closed door. "Yes," she was saying. "We'll need a preliminary estimate on Warhol." Quietly. There was a pause. "No, not yet. Just be ready." I stood still. My grandfather had been in the ground for less than 2 hours. When I walked back into the ballroom, my father had 2 board members cornered near the bar. He leaned in close, voice low. "We need continuity," he said. "Stability. No surprises." He glanced at me once. Just once. Not as a daughter, as a variable. That was the first time I understood something clearly. People grieve. They were pricing. 3 days later, we sat in Darius Wynn's office for the reading. The room was cooler than necessary. Leather chairs, a long mahogany table. Coffee gone cold in white porcelain cups. My parents arrived early with their own attorney. Brandon came in 10 minutes late, sunglasses still on. Darius adjusted his glasses and began. His voice didn't tremble. He'd done this before. "To my son-in-law, Graham Hart, and daughter-in-law, Celeste Hart, I leave the sum of $1. My mother's breath caught. My father's hand flattened against the table. "Having already provided for them generously during my lifetime." Silence. Then, "To my granddaughter, Tessa Hart, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all shares of Langford Commercial Holdings, real property interests, and investment accounts." The room tilted. I didn't feel triumph. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Darius continued. "There is one condition. Clause 7.3 requires a complete independent audit within 30 days of my passing. The transfer becomes final only upon successful completion." My father stood up so fast his chair scraped. "This is absurd," he said. "He wasn't in his right mind." Darius met his gaze calmly. "There are 3 independent evaluations attached to the will, Mr. Hart." My mother's composure cracked for half a second before she pulled it back together. "We'll contest," she said softly. Brandon finally took off his sunglasses. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. I sat there, hands folded, listening to my heartbeat. I didn't ask for this. I didn't even know about it. But I knew one thing. The audit wasn't a punishment. It was a test. The ride back to my parents' townhouse was silent except for the rain hitting the windshield. When we stepped inside, the silence ended. "How long have you been manipulating him?" my father demanded. "I didn't even know," I said. "Don't lie to me." My mother dropped her purse onto the console table. "Those Sunday visits," she said. "Those private conversations." "You planted this." Planted. Like I'd buried a seed in his mind and waited. On the dining table were documents, neat, ordered, prepared, trust transfer agreements, power of attorney forms, a temporary control structure that would place operational authority in my father's hands, pending audit review. "Sign these," my father said. It wasn't a request. I picked up the top document. The language was precise. I would remain a beneficiary, but without voting rights. Without direct access, without decision-making power. "You have no experience running a company this size," my mother said gently. "This protects you." Protects? My father leaned forward. Thousands of employees depend on stability. Don't make this about ego. Ego. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. The clock is ticking in the hallway. Every instinct I'd built over years told me to comply. To smooth it over. To be responsible. I need time, I said. You have until morning, my father replied. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom. The walls were still painted the same pale grey. The desk was still against the window. Nothing had changed, except everything had. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. Don't be stupid, just sign. You're not built for this. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. Not built for this. At 7 a.m, I walked downstairs. My parents were already seated at the breakfast table, coffee poured, papers aligned. Their attorney sat beside them. My mother slid a Mont Blanc pen toward me. I didn't sit. I'm not signing, I said. The room went very quiet. My father's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. I don't think I am. His voice dropped lower. After everything we've done for you. There it was. The bill, the price tag. My mother's eyes hardened. If you walk out of here without signing, don't expect to walk back in. I held her gaze. I understand. My father stood up. Then pack a bag. No shouting, no dramatics, just a decision. I went upstairs, pulled a suitcase from the closet, and packed what I could carry. When I came back down, my mother didn't look at me. My father opened the front door. You're choosing this, he said. I stepped outside into the cold morning air. The door closed behind me. I had one suitcase and $2,847 in my checking account. I stood on the sidewalk and realized something simple. I wasn't thrown out for being wrong. I was thrown out for not being useful. I didn't call a friend. I didn't call Brandon. I called Darius Wynne. He answered on the second ring. They removed you from the house, he said, like he'd already expected it. Yes, a pause. You're welcome at your grandfather's penthouse, he replied. He made arrangements. That was how I found myself riding an elevator I'd taken every Sunday for years, but this time with a suitcase instead of a chess move in mind. The doorman nodded at me differently, not politely. Intentionally. Marla Benson opened the door before I knocked. He told me this might happen, she said quietly. She stepped aside and let me in. The apartment felt unchanged. Same soft lighting, same scent of coffee and paper, but there was something new, a stillness that didn't belong to him anymore. Marla led me into Walter's study. The chessboard sat mid-game, his chair slightly angled back, and in the corner the old safe stood open. He started organising files 3 years ago, she said, every Sunday after you left. She handed me a small USB drive and a thick envelope sealed with his handwriting. I sat at his desk. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I opened the USB first. Folders labelled by year, subfolders marked with initials, scanned contracts, email threads, wire confirmations. At first glance, it looked like accounting. At second glance, it looked like concealment. Consulting fees routed through shell entities. Vendor invoices tied to addresses that resolved to parking lots. Transfers labelled as development reserves that moved offshore within 48 hours. The pattern wasn't sloppy, it was disciplined, and it ran through one name over and over again, Graham Hart. My father's signature appeared everywhere. Digital authorization codes, executive approvals, board-level acknowledgements, and in several instances, a second signature, Brandon Hart. I stared at that name longer than the rest. He wasn't just reckless, he was participating. The envelope contained something different, corporate filings for a subsidiary I'd discovered weeks earlier. The same one listing me as a director, except here, in Walter's file, were the original documents, unsigned, blank, my name typed in but no signature attached. Someone had filed an amended version later, without my consent. They hadn't just been planning to benefit from the structure. They'd been building insulation. If the audit uncovered irregularities, my name would be embedded in the paper trail. A cosigner, a shield. I leaned back in Walter's chair and looked at the city through the window. My parents hadn't been afraid I would ruin the company. They'd been afraid I would refuse to protect them. I called the number printed on the business card Marla had placed beside the USB. Evelyn Price, Senior Partner, Forensic Accounting. She didn't waste time on introductions. "We've been on retainer for 6 months," she said. "Mr. Langford anticipated resistance." "How bad is it?" I asked. "Significant," she replied. "Enough to trigger regulatory scrutiny if substantiated." Substantiated. That word felt clinical, but I understood what it meant. Prison wasn't abstract anymore. Over the next week, Evelyn's team worked out of the penthouse conference room, laptops open, quiet typing, pages printing. They reconstructed 15 years of financial movement. The number that began as a suspicion turned into a range, 200 million in confirmed diversion. Possibly more when interest and layered transfers were accounted for. They had not been improvising. They had been extracting. While that happened, my father made his own moves. An emergency board meeting was called. Agenda: leadership transition and estate stabilization. The subtext was obvious. Remove me before the audit could conclude. I watched the notice arrive in my inbox and felt something steady settle inside me. He was trying to outrun the clause. Celeste's strategy ran parallel. I received 2 calls from acquaintances within 48 hours. Polite voices, concerned tones. "Heard you might not be ready for this." "It must be overwhelming." Someone had been talking. Brandon sent me a single message. "You're destroying the family." I stared at it. Then I deleted it. On the morning of the board meeting, I stood in Walter's study alone. The chessboard was still mid-game. I moved one piece, a knight, forward, not aggressively, just enough. Evelyn entered with a stack of bound reports. "Finalised," she said. 3 copies for the board, 1 for council. "Are we ready?" I asked. She looked at me directly. Yes. I thought about the dining room table, the uncapped pen, the way my name had been positioned like an afterthought. I wasn't walking into that boardroom as a daughter. I was walking in as a fiduciary. My parents believed they could still control the narrative. They believed authority was volume, but they had underestimated something simple. Paper doesn't care who raised you. It only records what you signed. And they had signed everything. The board meeting was held in a private ballroom at a midtown hotel that tried very hard to look neutral. Neutral lighting, neutral carpet, neutral smiles at the door. I arrived 10 minutes early with Evelyn and her team. We carried 3 banker's boxes and a hard case with printed reports. My father was already at the front of the room, standing near a projection screen. His suit was perfectly tailored. His posture is calm. My mother sat in the first row, legs crossed, a leather folder on her lap, like she was attending a benefit luncheon. Brandon lingered near the back, phone in hand. 20 board members took their seats around the horseshoe table. Coffee cups, legal pads. The quiet shuffle of paper. Tom Riley gave me a brief nod as I sat down. The chairman called the meeting to order. My father stood. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady. "We are in a period of instability. Mr. Langford's passing created a vacuum. My responsibility as CFO is to protect continuity." Slides appeared behind him. Revenue charts, operating expenses, growth projections. Nothing about the will, nothing about the audit clause. "This is not about ego," he continued. "It's about fiduciary duty. Until estate matters are resolved, we must invoke emergency provision 15.3.2 to transfer executive authority to experienced leadership." Experienced leadership, meaning him. The chairman glanced at me briefly, then back at the agenda. "Is there discussion before we move to vote?" he asked. I could feel the air conditioning against the back of my neck. The faint clink of a spoon against porcelain. I stood up. Before you vote, I said, my voice level, you need to read this. There was no volume in it, just clarity. Evelyn stepped forward. I'm Evelyn Price, she said, senior partner in forensic accounting. We were retained under Clause 7.3 of Mr. Langford's will to conduct an independent audit. My father's jaw tightened. This is procedural, he said sharply. We can review it later. It is mandatory, Evelyn replied. And it is complete. Her team began distributing bound reports around the table. The room shifted, paper opened, pages flipped. The first slide appeared on the screen. Forensic Audit Summary, 2010 to 2025. Evelyn didn't dramatize. Over a 15-year period, she began, we identified $200 million in unauthorized transfers. These were routed through shell entities tied to executive authorization codes. Murmurs. My father stood. These are standard consulting structures. Evelyn clicked the remote. A vendor invoice appeared. Address. A parking lot in Newark. She clicked again. A warehouse in Queens with no active business license. These entities have no operational footprint, she said, but they receive payments totaling $47 million. Board members shifted in their seats. Tom Riley leaned forward, scanning his copy. Evelyn advanced the slide. An email thread filled the screen. From Graham Hart. Subject. Move it before he sees it. Body. Hide this from Walter. The room went quiet in a different way. My father's voice rose. Taken out of context. Context is included in Appendix B, Evelyn replied. She clicked again. Authorization logs appeared. Digital tokens matched my father's executive credentials. Dates. Times. Approval chains. Then another slide. Collateralization of pension reserve funds to secure private loans. That landed harder. One board member swore under his breath. My mother stood up. This is a misinterpretation, she said. There are explanations. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. There are patterns, she said. And they are consistent. She advanced to the final slide. Dual authorization signatures. Graham Hart, Brandon Hart. Brandon's phone slipped from his hand onto the carpet. I didn't know the full structure, he said quickly. Dad handled. My father turned toward him. Be quiet. And that was the moment. Not the numbers, not the email. The fracture. The chairman placed both palms on the table. Mr. Hart, he said carefully, did you authorize these transfers? My father looked around the room. At the board members who used to laugh at his jokes. At the charts he'd prepared. At me. It was strategic positioning, he said. That's not what I asked. Silence. Evelyn stepped back from the podium. Darius Wynne stood instead. There is one more document, he said. He unfolded a letter, Walter's handwriting. To the Board of Langford Commercial Holdings, he read. I have documented irregularities for 3 years. I did not act immediately because I required irrefutable proof. I leave my legacy, not to blood, but to integrity. The words didn't echo, they settled. My father didn't look at me. My mother didn't speak. The chairman cleared his throat. I move to suspend Graham Hart from his duties effective immediately, pending formal investigation. Second, Tom Riley said. The vote was called. Hands rose around the table, one after another. Not dramatic, just final. Security stepped forward discreetly. My father gathered his folder slowly. For the first time in my life, he looked smaller than the room. As he passed me, he didn't say my name. He didn't have to. The damage was already written. I remained standing until the room emptied. The reports still lay open. Numbers, signatures, lines of truth they had hoped would stay buried. They thought authority would protect them. They forgot that paper keeps its own record. I didn't follow them out. I stayed in that neutral hotel ballroom long after the last board member left, long after the coffee went cold and the hotel staff began clearing glasses from the side tables. The air felt thinner without the performance in it. Evelyn packed her files carefully. No rush. No celebration. "This will move to regulators," she said quietly. "Asset freeze is likely within the week." I nodded. There was no victory in it, just sequence. Outside, Manhattan moved like it always does. Yellow cabs, steam rising from grates, people hurrying toward dinners that had nothing to do with collapse. My phone buzzed once. A text from my mother. "You've made a terrible mistake." I read it twice. Then I turned the phone face down. For years I had protected them. Smoothed conversations. Signed when pressured. Stayed quiet when things felt off. I told myself it was loyalty. It wasn't. It was fear of being the one who broke the illusion. They thought they'd cut me out for good. All they really did was give me permission to stop protecting them. Back at my grandfather's penthouse, I set the audit binder on his desk. The city lights reflected in the glass behind me. I opened the drawer where he used to keep his notes. There was one more envelope inside, unsealed. A small brass key rested on top of a folded sheet of paper. Safe deposit, private banking. Box 1187. I exhaled slowly. Of course there was more. Walter never left a game unfinished. I didn't open the note yet. Not because I was afraid, because I wasn't in a hurry anymore. My father had tried to outrun the audit. My mother had tried to rewrite the narrative. Brandon had tried to shrink the damage to something emotional. But this wasn't emotional. It was structural. They buried the truth in paperwork. Unfortunately for them, I read every line. I walked to the window and looked down at the traffic crawling along Park Avenue. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider in someone else's story. I felt like the one holding the timeline. There would be investigations, depositions, questions in rooms colder than this one. There would be headlines. There would be calls from people who suddenly remembered my name. But none of that needed to happen tonight. Tonight, I had a key and patience. They believed the will was the end of it. They didn't understand. It was only the beginning of what I was willing to uncover. The morning after the board vote, I woke up at the kitchen table. Not because I meant to sleep there, because I never made it to the bedroom. There was a mug of coffee in front of me, cold and untouched. My shoulders ached the way they do after carrying something heavy for too long. The city outside the windows was already awake. Garbage trucks. A bus braking. Someone arguing faintly on the sidewalk. Winning didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving something that could have gone worse. I walked into my grandfather's study slowly. The air still held that faint mix of paper and dark roast coffee. The HVAC hummed softly. Morning light cut through the blinds in thin, clean stripes. Everything was exactly where he left it. The chessboard mid-game. His reading glasses folded beside a legal pad. A pen resting diagonally across the margin, like he'd stepped away for a moment. I stood there longer than I expected to. This place legally belonged to me now. It didn't feel like mine. It felt like I was borrowing it from someone who had trusted me more than my own parents ever had. I sat in his chair and opened the small envelope I'd avoided the night before. Inside was a Polaroid. It was us at the chess table years ago. I must have been 19. He was leaning back, smiling slightly, not at the camera but at me. On the back, in his handwriting, "Small choices, Tessa. Always small choices." There was no grand speech, no apology. No explanation for why he didn't confront my father sooner. Just that. I held the photo in my hands and felt something settle. He protected the evidence. He protected the company. But he didn't protect me from what I had to endure to get here. I would trade the money, the buildings, all of it, for one moment where my family chose me while they were alive. But I don't get to rewrite their choices. I only get to decide what I accept now. Later that afternoon, Marla stopped by. She stood in the doorway of the study, hands clasped. "I'm sorry," she said. "I saw some of it, not all. I didn't know how far it went." I nodded. "You did what you could," I said. "It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't to blame. It was reality." Before she left, she added quietly, "He was proud of you." Even when he didn't say it. That stayed with me. 2 days later, Brandon called. I let it ring once before answering. There was no background noise on his end, no arrogance either. "I didn't know the scale," he said. "Dad handled most of it." I waited. "I thought it was normal," he added. "Normal doesn't mean right," I replied. Silence. "I never meant for you to get dragged into it." "I was already in it," I said. "You just didn't notice." We didn't resolve anything. We didn't fight. We just ended the call. That felt more honest than any reconciliation would have. That evening, I changed the locks on the penthouse. Not because I was afraid someone would break in, because I needed to turn a key and know something was answered to me. I cleared one drawer in the study, just one. Left the rest untouched. The chessboard stayed exactly where it was. Some things don't need rearranging. As the sun set, I stood by the window again, the Polaroid in my hand. I wasn't the invisible one anymore. I wasn't the rounding error. I was the person who read the fine print and chose not to look away. On the desk beside me sat the brass key to the safety deposit box. I hadn't gone to the bank yet. There was also a voicemail notification from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't play it. Not tonight. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was steady, and I was paying attention. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, the one expected to keep things calm while everyone else makes the decisions, I understand that weight. This story isn't really about money. It's about what people reveal when they think you won't push back. It's about the quiet moment you decide you're done signing things you don't believe in. If that feels familiar, subscribe. Stay with me. Share this with someone who's been told they should just be grateful and keep quiet. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? I read everything. Sometimes the next story starts with something you've lived through.